Grandmere's story. I was a very popular girl when I was young, Julian, said Grandmere. I had many friends. I had pretty clothes, and as you see, I had always liked pretty clothes. She waved her hand down her side to make sure I noticed her dress. She smiled. I was a frivolous girl, she continued, spoiled. When the Germans came to France, I hardly took any notice. I knew that some Jewish families in my village were moving away, but my family was so cosmopolitan. My parents were intellects, atheists. We didn't even go to a synagogue. Okay, so I want to explain what is happening here. So when she says that the Germans were coming to France, I know that this is the Holocaust. So this is when Hitler took power in World War II. So the Germans were coming to France. Jewish families were being moved away. We now know that they were not just being moved away, but they were actually going to concentration camps where many of them died. But her family, intellects, so they were very smart. Atheist means that they did not actually believe in any type of God, and they didn't go to a synagogue, which means they never went to a Jewish church. So she was not at all concerned with what was going on around her. She even said that she was spoiled. So you're having all of this going on. Germans are coming, they're taking people away, but she feels like she's not worried about it. Okay. She paused here and asked me to bring her a glass of wine, which I did. She served herself a full glass, and as she always did, offered me some too. And as I always did, I said, "Non, merci." Like I said, Mom would go ballistic if she knew the stuff Grandmere did sometimes. There was a boy in my school called... Well, they called him Torte, she continued. He was, how do you say the word? A crippled? Is that how you say it? I don't think people use that word anymore, Grandmere. I said, it's not exactly politically correct, if you know what I mean. She flicked her fingers at me. Americans are always coming up with new words we can't say anymore. She said, "Oh, Loris, well, Torte's legs were deformed from polio. He needed 2 canes to walk with, and his back was all twisted. I think this is why he was named Torte. Crab. He walked sideways like a crab. I know it sounds very harsh. Children were meaner in those days." I thought about how I had called August the freak behind his back, but at least I never called him that to his face. Grandmere continued talking. I have to admit, at first I wasn't into her telling me one of her long stories, but I was getting into this one. Torte was a little thing, a skinny thing. None of us ever talked to him because he made us uncomfortable. He was so different. I never even looked at him. I was afraid of him, afraid to look at him, to talk to him, afraid he would accidentally touch me. It was easier to pretend he didn't exist. She took a long sip of her wine. One morning a man came running into our school. I knew him. Everyone did. He was a marquis, a partisan. Do you know what that is? He was against the Germans. He rushed into the school and told the teachers that the Germans were coming to take all of the Jewish children away. What? What is this? I could not believe what I was hearing. The teachers in the school went around to all the classes and gathered the Jewish children together. We were told to follow the marquis into the woods. We were going to hide. Hurry, hurry, hurry. I think there were maybe 10 of us in all. Hurry, 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 escape. Okay, so us. So now we know that her family had to have been Jewish. So we know from the other page that Germans were coming. Her family actually didn't practice the religion that Jewish people did, but the Germans actually did not care at all if you were even remotely somehow related to Jews or Jewish or anything along those lines. They took you. They also took people that had deformities, people that were crippled, people in like wheelchairs. They really took anybody that like almost wasn't perfect and that wasn't German. So it says that there were maybe 10 of us in all. So now I know that his grandmother had to have been included in there. Hurry, 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 escape. Grandmere looked at me to make sure I was listening, which of course I was. It was snowing that morning and very cold, and all I was thinking about was, if I go into the woods, I will ruin my shoes. I was wearing these beautiful new red shoes that Papa had bought me, you see. As I said before, I was a frivolous girl, perhaps even a little stupid. But this is what I was thinking. I did not even think to stop. Well, where is Mama and Papa? If If Germans were coming for the Jewish children, had they come for their parents already? This had not occurred to me. All I could think about was my beautiful shoes. So instead of following them a keys into the woods, I snuck away from the group and went to go hide inside the bell tower of the school. There was a tiny room up there full of crates and books, and there I hid. I remember thinking I would go home in the afternoon after all the Germans came and tell Mama and Papa about it. This was how stupid I was, Julian. I nodded. I couldn't believe I had never heard this story before. And then the Germans came, she said. There was a narrow window in the tower, and I could see them perfectly. I watched them run into the woods after the children. It did not take very long to find them. They all came back together. The Germans, the children, the Marquis soldier. Grandmere paused and blinked a few times, and then she took a deep breath. They shot the Marquis in front of all the children, she said quietly. He fell so softly, Julian, in the snow. The children cried. They cried as they were led away in a line. One of the teachers, Mademoiselle Patagine, went with them, even though she was not Jewish. She said she would not leave her children. No one ever saw her again, poor thing. By now, Julian, I had awakened from my stupidity. I was not thinking of my red shoes anymore. I was thinking of my friends who had been taken away. I was thinking of my parents. I was waiting until the nightmare. I was waiting until it was nighttime so I could go home to them. But not all the Germans had left. Some had stayed behind along with the French police. They were searching the school, and then I realized they were looking for me. Yes, for me. For the 1 or 2 Jewish children who had not gone into the woods. I realized then that my friend Rachel had not been among the Jewish children who were marched away, nor Jacob, a boy from another village who all the girls wanted to marry because he was so handsome. Where were they? They must have been hiding just like I was. Then I heard creaking, Julian, up the stairs. I heard footsteps up the stairs, coming closer to me. I was so scared. I tried to make myself as small as possible behind the crate and hid my head beneath a blanket. Here, Grandmere covered her head with her arms as if to show me how she was hiding. And then I heard someone whisper my name. She said it was not a man's voice. It was a child's voice. Sarah? The voice whispered again. I peeked out from the blanket. Torte! I answered, astonished. I was so surprised because in all my years I had known him, I did not think I had ever said a word to him, nor him to me, and yet there he was calling my name. They will find you here, he said. Follow me. And I did follow him, for by now I was terrified. He led me down a hallway into the chapel of a school which I had never really been to before. We went to the back of the chapel where there was a crypt. All this was new to me, Julian, and we crawled through the crypt so the Germans would not see us through the windows, because they were looking for us still. I heard when they found Rachel. I heard her screaming in the courtyard as they took her away. Poor Rachel. Torte took me down to a basement beneath the crypt. There must have been 100 steps at least. Sorry, guys. They were not easy for Torte, as you can imagine, with his terrible limp and the 2 canes, but he hopped down the stairs 2 at a time, looking behind him to make sure I was following. Finally, we arrived at the passage. It was so narrow we had to walk sideways to get through. And then we were in the sewers, Julian. Can you imagine? I knew instantly because of the smell, of course. We were knee-deep in refuse. You can imagine the smell. So much for my red shoes. So when she says we were knee-deep in refuse, that's actually poop. Yeah, they were in the sewers where all of the waste from the toilets go. So hopefully you guys can imagine, like, this was a very, very serious time. I know that some of you like to think that if German soldiers had come into the school looking for you, you would not do this. But they would have killed you on sight, or anybody on sight. That was just how it was. So fear many times does take over. So this was a very, very serious thing that had happened to her. We walked all night. It was so cold, Julian. Torte was such a kind boy, though. He gave me his coat to wear. It was to this day the most noble act anyone had ever done for me. He was freezing, too. but he gave me his coat. I was so ashamed of the way I had treated him. Oh, Julian, I was so ashamed. She covered her mouth with her fingers and swallowed. Then she finished the glass of wine and poured herself another one. The sewers led to Damersville, a small village about 15 kilometers away from Aubersville. Mama and Papa had always avoided this town because of the smell. The sewers from Paris drained onto the farmland there. We wouldn't even eat apples grown in Damersville, but it is where Torte lived. He took me to his house and we cleaned ourselves by the well. And then Torte brought me to the barn behind his house. He wrapped me up in horse blankets and told me to wait. He was going to get his parents. No, I pleaded, please don't tell them. I was so frightened I wondered if, when they saw me, they would call the Germans. You know, I have never met them before. But Torte left, and a few minutes later he returned with his parents. They looked at me. I must have seemed quite pathetic there, all wet and shivering. The mother, Vivian, put her arms around me to comfort me. Oh, Julian, that hug was the warmest hug I had ever felt. I cried so hard in this woman's arms because I knew I would never cry in my own Mama's arms again. I just knew it in my heart, Julian, and I was right. They had taken Mama that day, along with all the other Jews in the city. My father, who had been at work, had been warned that the Germans were coming and managed to escape. He was smuggled to Switzerland. But it was too late for Mama. She was deported that day to Auschwitz. I never saw her again. My beautiful Mama. She took a deep breath here and shook her head. So for those of you that don't know about Auschwitz, it was a concentration camp in World War II. And it was actually a death camp. So when you went to Auschwitz, it was actually pretty much like an automatic death camp that you went to. So for some reason or another, they did not want to keep her around, and she went to Auschwitz. And yeah, that was his mom, or his grandma never got to see her mom again. Very, very, very sad. Torte. Grandmere was silent for a few seconds. She was looking into the air like she could see it all happening again right in front of her. Now I understood why she never talked about this before. Because it was too hard for her. Torte's family hid me for 2 years in that barn, she continued slowly, even though it was so dangerous for them. We were literally surrounded by Germans, and the French police had large headquarters in Damersville. But every day I thanked my maker for that barn that was my home, and the food that Torte managed to bring me, even when there was hardly any food to go around. People were starving in those days, Julian, and yet they fed me. It was a kindness that I will never forget. It was always brave to be kind, but in those days, such kindness could cost you your life. Grandmere started to get teary-eyed at this point. She took my hand. The last time I saw Torte was 2 months before the liberation. So liberation is when the Americans came and when the Germans were when the Nazis were defeated. So it was 2 months before they were defeated. He had brought me some soup. It wasn't even soup. It was water with a little bit of bread and onion in it. We had both lost so much weight. I was in rags. So much for my pretty clothes. Even so, we managed to laugh, Torte and I. We laughed about things that happened in our school. Even though I could not go there anymore, of course, Torte still went every day. At night, he would tell me everything he had learned so that I would stay smart. He would tell me all about my old friends, too, and how they were doing. They all still ignored him, of course, and he never revealed to any of them that I was still alive. No one knew. No one could be trusted. But Torte was an excellent narrator, and he made me laugh a lot. He could do wonderful imitations, and he even had funny nicknames for all of my friends. Imagine that! Torte was making fun of them. I had no idea you were so mischievous, I told him. All those years you were probably laughing at me behind my back, too. Laughing at you? He said never. I had a crush on you. I never laughed at you. Besides, I only laughed at the kids who made fun of me. You never made fun of me. You simply ignored me. I called you Torte. And so? Everyone called me that. I really don't mind. I like crabs. Oh, Torte, I am so ashamed, I answered, and I remember I covered my face with both my hands. At this point, Grandmere covered her face with her hands. although her fingers were bent with arthritis now, and I could see her veins. I pictured her young hands covering her young face so many years ago. Torte took my hand with his own hand, she continued, slowly removing her hands from her face, and he held my hand for a few seconds. I was 14 years old then, and I had never kissed a boy. But he kissed me that day, Julian. Grandmere closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. After he kissed me, I said to him, I don't want to call you Torte anymore. What's your name? Grandmere opened her eyes and looked at me. So picture this, for she went to school with this kid all of these years. She was living in his barn. At any point in time, if the Germans found out, him and his family would be executed on sight. And she still didn't even know his name. So what do you guys think his name was? If you have seen... Oh, I don't want you guys to see it. If you guys have seen... if you have read the book, please do not tell anybody. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to talk about what you think his name is going to be. So I'm going to close the book. When I open it again, I want you guys to stay focused. So think about, what do you think Torte's real name was? So I'm guessing there's probably lots of August, maybe Augie's names being guessed. So let's see what Torte's real name was. Can you guess what he said? She asked. I raised my eyebrows as if to say, no, how would I know? Then she closed her eyes again and smiled. He said, my name is Julian. Oh my God, I cried. That's why you named Dad Julian. Even though everyone calls us Jules, that was his name. Oi, she said, nodding. And I'm named after Dad, I said, so I'm named after this kid. That is so cool. She smiled and ran her fingers through my hair, but she didn't say anything. Then I remembered her saying, the last time I saw Torte. So what happened to him, I asked, to Julian. Almost instantaneously, tears rolled down Gramere's cheeks. The Germans took him, she said, that same day. He was on his way to school. They were making another sweep of the village that morning. By now, Germany was losing the war and they knew it. But, I said, he wasn't even Jewish. They took him because he was crippled, she said between sobs. I'm sorry. I know you told me that word is a bad word, but I don't know another word in English. He was invalid. That is the word in French, and that is why they took him. He was not perfect. She practically spat out the word. They took all the imperfects from the village that day. It was a purge. The gypsies, the shoemaker's son, who was simple, and Julian, my Torte. They put him in a cart with the others. And then he was put on a train to Drancy, and from there to Auschwitz, like my mother. We heard later from someone who saw him there that they sent him to the gas chambers right away. Just like that, poof, he was gone. My savior, my little Julian. So in the gas chambers, they would turn on what would seem kind of like a shower, but it would really be gas that would kill you very quickly. So they actually took him from his walk to school, shipped him to Auschwitz, and he was dead right away in the gas chambers. Now, I don't know how far of a distance that would have been. I don't know how far of a journey that would have been. But they were just crammed into carts on a train. No food, no water, no light. Packed in. Very, very, very packed in. So definitely not like a luxury trip to Auschwitz. She stopped to wipe her eyes with a handkerchief and then drank the rest of the wine. His parents were devastated, of course. Embremere and Mimir. So I'm getting, maybe this is like Mr. and Mrs. or Mr. and Mrs. We didn't find out he was dead until after the liberation. But we knew. We knew. She dabbed her eyes. I lived with them for another year after the war. They treated me like a daughter. They were the ones who helped me track down Papa, although it took some time to find him. So much chaos in those days. When Papa was finally able to return to Paris, I went to live with him. But I always visited the Bottomiers. Even when they were very old, I never forgot the kindness they showed me. She sighed. She had finished her story. Gramere, I said after a few minutes, that's like the saddest thing I've ever heard. I don't even know you were in the war. I mean, Dad's never talked about any of this. She shrugged. I think it's very possible that I never told your dad this story. She said, I don't like to talk about the sad things, you know. In some ways, I'm still the frivolous girl I used to be. But when I heard you talking about that little boy in your school, I could not help but to think of Torte, of how afraid I had once been of him and how badly we treated him because of his deformity. Those kids had been so mean to him, Julian. It breaks my heart to think of it. When she said that, I don't know, something just really broke inside of me, completely unexpected. I looked down and all of a sudden I started to cry. And when I say I started to cry, I don't mean a few tears rolling down my cheeks. I mean like a full-scale, snot-filled crying. Julian, she said softly. I shook my head and covered my face with my hands. I was terrible, Gramere. I whispered. I was so mean to Auggie. I'm so sorry, Gramere. Julian, she said again. Look at me. No! Look at me, mon cher. She took my face in her hands and forced my face to look at her. I felt so embarrassed. I really couldn't look her in the eyes. Suddenly, that word that Mr. Tushman had used, the word that everyone kept trying to force on me, came to me like a shout. Remorse. Yeah, there it was. That word in all its glory. Remorse. I was shaking with remorse. I was crying with remorse. Julian, said Gramere, we all make mistakes, mon cher. No, you don't understand. I answered, it wasn't just one mistake. I was those kids who were mean to Torte. I was the bully, Gramere. It was me. She nodded. I called him a freak. I laughed behind his back. I left mean notes, I screamed. Mom kept making excuses for why I did that stuff, but there wasn't any excuse. I just did it, and I didn't even know why. I don't know. I was crying so hard I couldn't even speak. Gramere stroked my head and hugged me. Julian, she said softly, you are so young. The things you did, you know they were not right. But that does not mean you are not capable of doing right. It only means that you chose to do wrong. This is what I mean when I say you made a mistake. It was the same with me. I made a mistake with Torte. But the good thing about life, Julian, she continued, is that we can fix our mistakes sometimes. We learn from them. We get better. I never made a mistake like the one I made with Torte again. Not with anyone in my life. And I have had a very, very long life. You will learn from your mistake too. You must promise yourself that you will never behave like that with anyone else again. One mistake does not define you, Julian. Do you understand me? You must simply act better next time. I nodded, but I still cried for a long, long time after that.